Bellweather Crossing was the kind of town where everyone knew your troubles, and somehow always had an opinion about them. For Lenora Vale, being newly widowed, nearly penniless, and judged by people who refused to believe she could be hungry, made every day feel like another battle. But when a quiet mountain guide offered her work at a remote station deep in the Whitecap Range, Lenora stepped into a world where survival depended on skill, courage, and trust, not appearances. What began as a simple job would lead her into a brutal winter, a dangerous family secret, and a fight for the future her husband had tried to leave behind. So settle in, because this is the story of a woman who entered the mountains with almost nothing, and built a place where no desperate traveler would ever be turned away. The town sat in a narrow Colorado valley beneath the Whitecap Range, a wall of granite peaks that turned silver before storms and disappeared entirely when winter closed its fist. One muddy road passed between two rows of weather-beaten buildings, crossed a wooden bridge over the Bell River, and continued west until it narrowed into a wagon trail and surrendered to the mountains. The railroad had surveyed Bellweather twice and rejected it both times. The soil was too rocky for dependable farming, the river flooded in spring, and the nearby mines produced just enough ore to keep investors hopeful without making anyone rich. Yet the town survived because it stood between the lower settlements and the northern passes. Prospectors bought tools there. Trappers traded hides. Freight crews repaired wheels and replaced horses. Families traveling west stopped for flour, lamp oil, and advice they usually ignored. The people of Bellweather Crossing had learned to judge strangers quickly. A man was measured by his hands, his horse, and the condition of his boots. A woman was measured by her household, her husband, and how gracefully she carried hardship. By those standards, Lenora Vale had become a public disappointment. She had arrived in Bellweather 9 years earlier as Lenora Pierce, the broad-shouldered daughter of an Iowa miller. She was 21 then, with thick, dark hair, a quiet manner, and the kind of sturdy build that made narrow chairs complain beneath her. She could lift a grain sack, butcher a hog, preserve a summer's worth of fruit, and prepare dinner for 20 men without raising her voice. None of those abilities impressed the young women who gathered outside Bell's general store to discuss ribbons and courtships. Martin Vale had been impressed. He was a surveyor, with a careful smile and a mind that organized the world into distances, elevations, and lines. He noticed Lenora when she corrected a freight clerk who had stacked coffee sacks beside a leaking barrel of kerosene. She had not been loud or rude. She had simply moved the coffee herself and explained that no customer should have to drink fuel-flavored coffee because a grown man had been too lazy to use his nose. Martin laughed. Then he helped her. They married 11 months later. For a while, their life was modest but hopeful. Martin worked for mining companies, land offices, and county engineers. Lenora took in mending, baked pies for the hotel, and kept a kitchen garden behind their small rented house. Martin was often gone for weeks at a time, but when he returned, he brought sketches of mountain valleys and stories about hidden lakes where the water appeared blue enough to stain the sky. He also brought notes. Martin wrote constantly. He filled small notebooks with bearings, weather observations, rock formations, camp expenses, and descriptions of every meal Lenora had packed for him. He liked systems. Lenora liked usefulness. Together, they developed recipes that could survive long journeys: dried bean cakes, smoked onion broth, hard biscuits softened with bacon fat, berry paste sealed in waxed cloth, and a thick cornmeal mixture that could be cooked over a weak fire. "You should put your name on these," Martin told her once as she tested a batch of travel bread. "My name would not improve the taste. It would improve the truth." She had smiled and pushed another slice toward him. "Eat it before you begin giving speeches." Their marriage had not been grand, but it had been kind. Lenora considered kindness a form of wealth, although Bellweather Crossing rarely counted it that way. The last autumn of Martin's life began with an offer from the Western Meridian Company. The company wanted a route surveyed through the Whitecap Range before snow sealed the high country. Their investors believed a narrow valley beyond Blue Divide might hold silver deposits. The pay was enough to clear Martin and Lenora's debts, and perhaps purchase the house they had rented for years. Lenora did not trust the timing. "The peaks were white this morning," she said while packing his wool socks. "Only a dusting. The north side keeps snow longer. I'll be off the north side before the real weather arrives." Martin said it lightly, but she saw the tension behind his eyes. The company had delayed the expedition twice, then demanded that he finish before winter or lose the contract. Surveyors did not have unions or wealthy relatives. They worked when work appeared. Before dawn, Lenora prepared his food. She wrapped biscuits in cloth, packed dried apples, measured coffee, and placed their battered recipe notebook in the top of his field case. Martin held it up. "You trust me with the sacred book? It has your handwriting in it too. Mine is not sacred. Yours is barely readable." He kissed her forehead. "I'll be back before the first hard freeze." The first hard freeze came 11 days later. Martin did not. A rescue party found one of his pack animals wandering near a lower trail. 2 weeks after that, a guide discovered Martin's broken compass and a section of survey chain beside a collapsed ridge. By then, the Whitecap Range had been buried beneath early snow. No body was recovered. Western Meridian paid Lenora only a portion of the promised amount. The company claimed Martin had failed to complete the survey. The landlord demanded 3 months of back rent. A bank agent arrived with papers showing that Martin had borrowed against future earnings to purchase new equipment. Lenora sold the equipment, the furniture, and nearly everything else she owned. She kept one black dress, her cooking tools, and Martin's recipe notebook, which had been returned in a water-stained leather case found with the pack animal. Grief would have been difficult enough without witnesses. In Bellweather Crossing, it became a public occupation. People watched to see whether she cried too much or too little. They wondered why Martin had taken such a dangerous contract. They suggested that a more attentive wife might have persuaded him to remain home. When Lenora applied for work at the hotel kitchen, the owner told her the dining room required someone with a more cheerful appearance. By late November, she was sleeping in the back room of a laundry in exchange for scrubbing sheets. Her wages bought almost nothing after the town's food prices rose. She learned how hunger altered time. Morning became the distance to noon. Noon became the distance to evening. A day was no longer measured by hours, but by the number of times she walked past the bakery and refused to look through the window. One gray afternoon, she entered Bell's general store with 14 cents in her pocket. Merton Bell stood behind the counter, arranging tins of peaches in a pyramid. He was a narrow man with carefully parted hair and a gold watch chain he touched whenever he wanted people to notice that he owned one. His store smelled of coffee, leather, soap, and smoked meat. To Lenora, the scent was almost unbearable. "I need oats," she said. "How much?" "As much as 14 cents will buy." Merton looked at her, then at the 2 women examining cloth near the stove. 14 cents will not buy much." "I know." He scooped oats into a paper sack, but before weighing them, he removed nearly half. Lenora watched his hand. "That appears short." Prices went up. "The board says 6 cents a pound. That board is old. You changed it this morning." The women near the stove became quiet. Merton rested both palms on the counter. "Mrs. Vale, are you accusing me of cheating a widow? I am asking you to use the scale." His mouth tightened. "There is no call for that tone." "My tone does not change the weight." One of the women coughed to hide a laugh. Merton's face reddened. "You ought to be grateful anyone extends you consideration," he said. "You come in here claiming hunger, but a person only has to look at you to see you are in no danger of wasting away." The store fell silent. Lenora felt the words land with the practiced cruelty of something Merton had been waiting to say. Her body had always made strangers believe they understood her habits. They assumed she ate greedily, moved slowly, and lacked discipline. When she was young, people had laughed if she took a second biscuit and stared if she refused one. After Martin died, those same people treated the shape of her body as evidence that grief and poverty had not truly touched her. Lenora looked at the smoked hams hanging behind Merton. Then she looked at the oats in his hand. "Hunger does not ask for public approval," she said. Merton gave a dry chuckle. "Neither does common sense. 14 cents buys what I say it buys." A voice from the doorway answered him. "No, 14 cents buys what your sign says it buys." The man who entered carried Winter into the store with him. Snow dusted the shoulders of his dark coat. His beard was trimmed close, but the wind had roughened his face and turned his cheeks red. He was tall without being imposing, and he moved with the balanced caution of someone accustomed to uncertain ground. August Romain was known in Bellweather Crossing, although few people knew him well. He guided freight parties through the Whitecaps, delivered mail to remote stations, and occasionally led rescue crews into weather that frightened other men indoors. He owned Blue Divide Station, a former mining outpost 12 miles beyond the nearest maintained road. Merton forced a smile. "August, I did not hear you come in. That is because you were busy insulting a customer. Private business. You made it public." August walked to the counter and set down $2 silver. "Give Mrs. Vale 10 pounds of oats, 5 pounds of beans, coffee, salt, and a pound of bacon." Lenora straightened. "No." Merton paused. August looked at her. His eyes were pale grey and steady. "No?" he asked. "I did not request charity. I did not offer it. You just placed money on the counter. For supplies. For me. For a job." Merton leaned forward with open interest. The women by the stove pretended to study cloth again. August continued. "My station needs a manager. The last man quit after he discovered winter involves snow. I need someone who can keep accounts, ration supplies, cook for a crew, and treat common injuries without fainting." Lenora studied him. "What crew?" "4 men at present, possibly 7 by spring." "Why would you ask me?" Martin spoke of your skills. At the sound of her husband's name, her suspicion sharpened. "You knew Martin." "I guided his party to the lower pass." "You were with him when he disappeared." "No. I warned the company not to send him over Whitecap Spur. Their foreman insisted. Martin believed the alternate route could be surveyed before the storm. I was assigned to another supply team." August's voice remained calm, but guilt moved beneath it. Lenora had met many men who defended themselves quickly. August did not. "What happened to him?" she asked. "I do not know." It was the first honest answer anyone had given her. August pushed the silver toward Merton. "The supplies are an advance on wages. Mrs. Vale can repay it through work, should she accept." "And if I refuse?" Lenora asked. "Then Merton can return my money, weigh your oats honestly, and live with the disappointment of losing a sale." The woman nearest the stove laughed aloud this time. Merton filled the order. Lenora left the store carrying more food than she had possessed in weeks. August followed her into the cold. Snow had begun to fall, soft flakes turning the road pale. "You arranged that neatly," she said. "I hoped you would not mind." "I mind being cornered." "I suspected you might. Then why do it?" "Because you needed food, and I needed help. Pride is useful until it starts making decisions for the stomach." She stopped walking. "That sounds like advice from a man who has never been publicly informed he is too large to be hungry." August looked back toward Bell's store. "No," he said. "It is advice from a man who once nearly froze because he was too proud to admit he had lost the trail." His answer did not erase her anger, but it prevented it from becoming simple. "What does the position pay?" $22 a month, room and board included." "That is high. The work is difficult." "How remote?" 3 hours by wagon in good weather, a day in bad." "When would I leave?" "Tomorrow morning." Lenora glanced down at her packages. "Do you always hire people this quickly?" "No." "Then why me?" August took a moment before answering. "Because Martin said you could make a meal from an empty cupboard and bring order to a room full of stubborn men. I have both an empty cupboard and stubborn men." Despite herself, Lenora almost smiled. August saw it, but did not mention it. The next morning, she packed her belongings into one trunk and climbed onto August's freight wagon. Bellweather Crossing disappeared behind them beneath a curtain of snow. The road to Blue Divide Station followed the Bell River north, then climbed through dense pine forest. August drove the team, while Lenora sat beside him beneath a buffalo robe. For the first hour, neither spoke much. The mountains rose around them with frightening patience. Their slopes were dark with timber, their upper ridges white and sharp against the sky. Wind moved across the peaks in long banners of snow. August pointed out landmarks as they traveled. That cut in the ridge is Needle Gap. Never approach it after a thaw. The ground looks firm, but water runs beneath the rock. Lenora followed his gesture. What about that slope? Avalanche country. And the trees below it. Also avalanche country. You have chosen a comforting place to live. It is honest country. It tells you what can kill you. People can hide it better. August glanced at her, then returned his attention to the road. Blue Divide Station appeared near dusk. The main building was a 2-story timber structure with stone chimneys at both ends. A stable leaned against the eastern wall. 2 smaller cabins stood nearby, half buried in snow. Beyond them, the land dropped toward a frozen creek and rose again toward a narrow pass. Smoke curled from one chimney. A red-haired man burst through the station door before the wagon stopped. "You found one!" he shouted. August set the brake. "Found one what, Perry?" "A cook! I found a station manager!" The man removed his hat and bowed extravagantly toward Lenora. Perry Knoll, assistant guide, mule negotiator, and innocent victim of August Romain's cooking. August climbed down. Perry once burned water. It was thin soup. It was water. An older man emerged from the stable carrying a lantern. His white beard reached the collar of his coat, and one leg dragged slightly as he walked. "Nils Door," August said. "Trapper. Repairs anything made before 1870 and insults anything made after." Nils raised the lantern to examine Lenora. "You look sensible," he said. "Compared to whom?" Nils turned the lantern toward Perry. "Good answer." Inside, Lenora discovered the station was larger than expected and more disordered than feared. The main room contained a long table, a cast-iron stove, shelves of tools, piles of rope, damp coats, broken crates, and an assortment of tin plates that appeared to have been washed by being shown briefly to water. The kitchen occupied one corner. Its pantry held flour, beans, dried peas, salt pork, coffee, onions, and 3 shriveled apples. Lenora opened a storage barrel. Empty. She checked another. Nearly empty. She lifted the lid of the flour bin and looked at August. "You told me you had an empty cupboard." "I try to be honest. This is not an empty cupboard. This is a cupboard that has been robbed and then insulted." Perry leaned against the table. "We had a supply delay." "When?" "October." It was now early December. Lenora turned slowly. "What have you been eating?" Perry pointed toward the stove. "August makes a stew." Nils lowered himself into a chair. "He puts everything in it." "What is everything?" "Whatever has not escaped." August removed his gloves. "A freight wagon is due in 6 days." Lenora looked at the snow thickening outside the window. "And if it does not arrive?" "It will." "That was not my question." August met her gaze. "If it does not arrive, we make what we have last." Lenora began counting immediately. She weighed the flour, beans, salt pork, and dried peas. She inspected the root cellar, finding potatoes, turnips, 2 crates of carrots, and several jars of preserved berries. In the smokehouse, she found venison, though less than the inventory ledger claimed. "Who keeps the records?" she asked. Perry raised his hand halfway. "Why halfway?" "I am only halfway responsible." Nils pointed at him. "The other half is poor arithmetic." Lenora sat at the table with the ledger and recalculated every item. By midnight, she knew 3 things. The station had enough food for 4 people for perhaps 25 days. August expected 2 surveyors and a mail carrier within the week, which would raise the number to 7. The freight wagon was carrying most of their winter flour, medicine, fuel oil, and livestock feed. The next morning, Lenora changed the rules. Breakfast was oatmeal cooked with dried berries. Coffee was measured, not poured freely. Lunch was bean soup with 1 slice of bread per person. Supper was venison stew thickened with potatoes. Perry stared into his bowl. "Is the meat hiding?" "The meat is rationed." I have always opposed that word. You may oppose it after spring. August tasted the stew. This is better than mine, Nils grunted. Snow is better than yours. Lenora assigned shelves, labeled barrels, established a cleaning schedule, and locked the main storeroom at night. She recorded every ounce of food removed. Perry complained theatrically, but he followed her instructions. Nils followed them without comment. August watched, asked practical questions, and gave her authority without undermining it. That surprised her. Martin had respected her judgment, but outside their home, men often treated women's competence as a temporary novelty. August did not praise every decision or hover over her work. He simply expected her to do the job, and backed her when others resisted. On the 4th day, the freight wagon had not arrived. On the 6th day, a storm closed the southern trail. August and Perry rode out at dawn to search for it. They returned after dark with ice on their coats, and no wagon behind them. The lower bridge washed out before the freeze, August said. The freight crew turned back. Perry dropped into a chair. We are officially living on turnips and Mrs. Vale's mercy. Lenora set bowls of soup before them. How long before another wagon can reach us? August warmed his hands near the stove. At least 3 weeks, possibly longer. Then we reduce portions tomorrow. Perry looked wounded. Again? Lenora sat across from him. You may eat well now and starve later, or eat carefully now and remain alive long enough to complain in spring. Nils lifted his spoon. I vote for the complaining. The station settled into winter discipline. Lenora transformed leftovers into meals that felt new. She roasted turnips, mashed them with bacon drippings, and shaped them into cakes. She ground dried beans into flour and mixed them with wheat flour to make heavier bread. She simmered bones twice, then crushed them for the dogs. She brewed tea from pine needles after Nils explained which trees were safe. She added preserved berries to the blandest meals and saved onion skins to strengthen broth. No food was wasted. Her notebook grew crowded with adjustments. Martin's old recipes filled the front pages. Lenora added her own in the margins. Measurements for high-altitude baking, notes on preserving meat in sub-zero temperatures, and instructions for feeding injured men who could not tolerate solid food. The first emergency came when Perry split his palm with an axe. He stumbled into the station with blood soaking his glove. Lenora sat him at the table, washed the wound, and examined it beneath a lamp. You need stitches. Perry turned pale. I thought you were a cook. I am also the only person here who has sewn skin before. You have? My father owned a mill. Machinery does not forgive carelessness. Perry looked toward August. You could do it. August shook his head. I could hold you down. That is not the comfort you think it is. Lenora cleaned the needle in boiling water and whiskey. She gave Perry a folded leather strap. Bite this. Is there no gentler method? There is. Do not put your hand beneath an axe. Nils laughed so hard he began coughing. Perry endured 6 stitches. Lenora wrapped his hand and ordered him away from heavy work for a week. You saved my fingers, he admitted later. I saved you from explaining to every future employer why you cannot count past 5. The second emergency came during a night storm. Wind struck the station hard enough to shake soot from the chimney. Near midnight, Lenora woke to the sound of something heavy hitting the eastern wall. She dressed and entered the main room to find August pulling on his boots. The stable roof, he said. They ran outside. One side of the roof had sagged beneath the snow load. The horses screamed and kicked inside. Perry and Nils followed with lanterns and shovels. August climbed onto the lower slope of the roof, while the others cleared snow from below. Lenora led the frightened animals out one by one, covering their eyes with cloth to calm them. A support beam cracked. August, she shouted. He jumped as the roof section collapsed behind him. Snow and timber crashed into the empty stall where a horse had stood seconds earlier. For the next 3 hours they worked in wind that stole breath from their mouths. They moved feed, secured the remaining roof, and sheltered the animals in the supply cabin. When they finally returned inside, Perry's lips were blue and Nils was shaking badly. Lenora stripped off their wet coats, wrapped them in blankets, and heated stones near the stove. She did not allow anyone to crowd too close to the fire. Slowly, she ordered. You warm slowly. August watched her place heated stones near Nils's feet. How do you know this? My mother treated winter injuries. We lived near a river. Every year, some boy believed ice respected confidence. Nils's shaking eased. Perry looked at Lenora over his blanket. You should charge more than $22. I intend to. August's tired mouth curved. By January, even Perry stopped questioning her ration plans. The winter grew harsher. Snow buried the lower windows. Trails vanished. The mail carrier never arrived. 2 surveyors expected from the north did not appear, which meant fewer mouths but also raised fears that they had become stranded elsewhere. August made short patrols whenever the weather allowed. He checked markers, searched emergency shelters, and studied the ridges for signs of slides. Lenora began joining him on the safer routes. At first, August refused. You have no mountain experience. I have lived here 6 weeks. That is not experience. It is more than I had 5 weeks ago. The terrain is dangerous. So is staying here unable to help if something happens to you. His expression hardened. Nothing will happen to me. That is the kind of sentence people say shortly before something happens to them. Perry, listening from the stove, pointed at Lenora. She has you there. August gave him a look. Perry became fascinated by the ceiling. The following morning, August taught Lenora to use snowshoes. She fell twice in the first 100 yards, once into a drift deep enough that only her hat remained visible. August reached for her arm. I can stand, she said from the snow. I believe you. You are laughing. I am not. You are doing it with your shoulders. She emerged, covered in powder. August's expression was composed, except for the unmistakable brightness in his eyes. Mountain dignity is overrated, he said. So is mountain guidance. But she learned. Her weight required her to choose firmer roots and wider snowshoes, yet her strength gave her remarkable endurance. August showed her how to read wind-carved snow, how to recognize unstable slopes, and how to mark a trail when visibility disappeared. She learned never to trust silence after heavy snowfall. Silence could mean peace, or it could mean that the whole mountain was waiting to move. During those patrols, Lenora saw another side of August. At the station, he was reserved and exact. In the mountains, he became attentive to every sound. He knew where foxes crossed the creek and which trees held their branches lower before a storm. He spoke to the horses as though negotiating with respected colleagues. He carried extra food not for himself but for travelers they might find. You keep emergency caches everywhere, Lenora said when he showed her a small box built beneath a rock shelf. 3 days of food, matches, bandages, and a blanket. Who pays for them? I do. Do travelers know? Some. Then why have I heard people in town call you unfriendly? Because I do not enjoy town. That is not the same as disliking people. Most people do not care about the distinction. Lenora placed 2 fresh packets of bean cake inside the cache. I do. Their companionship developed without announcement. August began asking her opinion before making supply decisions. Lenora began saving the strongest coffee for mornings when he had to ride out before dawn. He repaired the loose handle on her favorite cooking pot. She replaced the missing buttons on his coat. Neither act was romantic enough to invite discussion, which allowed both of them to value the acts more honestly. At night, when Perry played cards with Nils, August and Lenora often worked at the long table. He updated route maps, while she copied recipes and inventories. One evening, August noticed Martin's notebook open beside her. I remember that cover, he said. Lenora ran her fingers over the cracked leather. He carried it on every expedition. Martin wrote during meals. He wrote during everything. Once, he tried to describe a thunderstorm while standing in it. His ink ran down the page. August smiled faintly. He spoke about you often. Lenora's hand stopped. What did he say? That you were more capable than any 3 men in Bellweather. He exaggerated. He did not seem like a man who exaggerated. No, he was terrible at it. The warmth in her voice was followed by a familiar ache. August waited rather than rushing to fill the silence. Lenora appreciated that. Many people treated grief as an awkward pause they were required to repair. August allowed it to exist. Did he seem frightened before he left for Whitecap Spur? She asked. Yes. The honesty hurt, but she wanted it. Why did he go? The company threatened to replace him and withhold his pay. He believed he could complete enough of the survey to protect the contract. He always believed careful planning could overcome bad odds. Sometimes it can, not always. No, August folded his map. I should have gone after him sooner. You said you were assigned elsewhere. I returned to the lower camp the day the storm began. The foreman told me Martin had taken 2 men over the spur. I argued that we should follow immediately. The foreman refused to risk more lives. What did you do? I went the next morning. Lenora looked at him. You never told me that. I did not find him. You tried. Not soon enough. Outside, snow brushed the window like sand. Lenora closed the notebook. Martin made his own decision. The company pressured him, but you did not send him. August stared at the map. I knew the range better than anyone there. Knowledge does not make you responsible for every choice another person makes. That sounds reasonable. It is. Do you believe it? Lenora considered the question. Some days. August nodded, as though that answer meant more than certainty would have. In February, Nils developed a fever. It began with a cough he dismissed as age. Within 2 days, his breathing became labored, and he could not cross the room without stopping. Lenora moved him to the warmest sleeping area and boiled water constantly to keep moisture in the air. She prepared broth, monitored his temperature, and persuaded him to drink by threatening to pour it through his nose. You would not, Nils muttered. I would dislike it. That is different. Drink. August wanted to ride for a doctor. The southern trail is closed, Lenora said. I could reach Bellweather through Needle Gap. In this weather, it may be his only chance. It may also leave him without you, and leave us with 2 patients instead of 1. August paced to the window. Snow erased the yard beyond the glass. I cannot stand here and do nothing. You are not doing nothing. Cut more wood. Keep the chimney clear. Help me turn him every 2 hours. August looked at Nils, whose face had become grey beneath his beard. What if that is not enough? Then we will know we did everything that was possible, not everything fear demanded. For 5 days they cared for Nils. Lenora slept in short stretches beside his bed. August handled every station duty she could not. Perry, forbidden from entering the sick room often, scrubbed pots, carried water, and spoke more quietly than anyone had thought possible. On the 6th morning, Nils's fever broke. He woke near noon and demanded bacon. Lenora laughed from pure relief. You may have broth. I survived for broth. You survived because of broth. Nils looked at August. She is becoming unreasonable. August's tired eyes softened. She has always been unreasonable. Lenora turned toward him. Would you like to join Nils on broth? No. Then choose your words with care. That evening, Perry opened the last jar of preserved berries without permission and divided it among all 4 of them. Lenora started to protest. Perry raised his spoon. This is not waste. This is celebration. Nils ate his portion slowly. No man should recover from death and be welcomed back with turnips, he said. Lenora allowed the celebration. By March, the weather began to change. Not improve exactly, but change. The sunlight lasted longer. Icicles formed beneath the eaves. Snow softened in the afternoons and froze hard at night. With the possibility of spring came the return of questions Lenora had postponed. What would happen when the season ended? Would August still need a station manager? Would she return to Bellweather? Had this place become her home, or merely a shelter from a life she no longer knew how to resume? The idea of leaving unsettled her. So did the idea of staying for reasons she had not named. One afternoon, while organizing Martin's notebook, Lenora found 2 pages stuck together near the back. Moisture had sealed them. She held the book near the stove until the paper softened, then separated the pages carefully. At first, she saw what appeared to be another recipe: candle glass pudding. The title confused her. Martin had never created a pudding by that name. The ingredients were stranger still. 2 measures white stone, 1 measure black sand. Heat where 3 shadows cross. Turn north after the 2nd bell. She read it twice. There were no cooking instructions. Instead, the lines continued with references to elevation, creek bends, and angles of sunlight. Lenora carried the notebook to August. "Does this look like a recipe to you?" He read the page. "No." "What does 3 shadows cross mean?" August took the notebook to the window. "The Whitecap Range has 3 narrow peaks west of Blue Divide. At certain times of day, their shadows overlap. And Second Bell, there are 2 bell-shaped rock formations above Candlemaker Creek." Lenora felt a chill unrelated to the weather. Martin hid directions in the notebook. August studied the next page. Small numbers had been written beside ingredients. Quantities became bearings. Cooking times became distances. Temperatures became elevations. Together, they decoded the entries. The instructions led toward an abandoned prospect near Candlemaker Creek, several miles northwest of the station. Old county records mentioned small silver claims there, most believed worthless. August traced a line on his map. "This route matches part of Martin's final survey. Why hide it?" Mining companies have been known to claim anything found by employees, even when the contract does not clearly allow it. Lenora turned another page. A sentence had been pressed so lightly into the paper that it was visible only at an angle. "Found blue-white ore beneath glass seam. Assay needed. Tell L only." Her throat tightened. He meant to tell me. August read the note, but did not touch the book. If the ore was valuable, Western Meridian may have sent him to confirm it. Or Martin found it while surveying and feared they would take it. Both are possible. Could this be why he died? August's expression grew grave. "The range killed many men without assistance. We should not invent murder where weather is enough." It was a grounded answer, and Lenora valued him for giving it. "What is candleglass?" she asked. "A local name for pale quartz that catches light like wax beneath glass. Prospectors sometimes found silver near it. Sometimes, most of the time, they found quartz. They waited until the trail was safe enough to travel. In early April, August and Lenora followed Martin's coded directions to Candlemaker Creek. Perry remained at the station with Nils, who was still regaining strength. The route took them through a narrow forest, across a frozen tributary, and up a slope scattered with broken stone. The bell-shaped formations appeared near noon. At the place where 3 shadows crossed, Lenora found an iron marker driven into the ground. Martin's initials had been scratched into it. She knelt and touched them. For months, Martin's death had felt like an absence without edges. Here, for the first time, she stood where he had stood. She could imagine him removing his glove, bending over the marker, writing quickly, before the cold stiffened his fingers. August gave her distance. When she rose, they followed the final bearing to a shallow cut in the rock. Inside, a seam of pale quartz ran through darker stone. August chipped away a sample with a hammer. Silver glinted beneath the surface. "Is it valuable?" Lenora asked. "Possibly. We need an assayer." Near the cut, they found the remains of Martin's temporary camp, rusted tins, a torn canvas strap, and a stone fire ring. They also found a metal document tube wedged beneath a fallen log. Inside was a copy of Martin's claim notice, signed and dated 3 days before his disappearance. It named Lenora as co-owner. She read the paper twice before sitting on a rock. "He filed it for both of us." August crouched nearby. "He wanted you protected. Then why was it never recorded?" "He may have planned to submit it in Bellweather after finishing the survey, which means anyone who found this could destroy it." "Yes." Lenora looked toward the ridges. "Who knew he was here?" "Western Meridian's foreman, members of his survey party, possibly anyone they told." The wind moved through the pass. August wrapped the sample and placed it in his pack. "We do not discuss this in town until the claim is recorded." Lenora held the document tube tightly. Agreed. They did not know that Edgar Vale had already begun asking questions. Edgar was Martin's older half-brother, though the 2 men had shared little besides a surname. Where Martin had been patient, Edgar was impatient. Where Martin saved money, Edgar gambled. He moved between cattle towns, mining camps, and temporary business partnerships that ended whenever creditors arrived. He had visited Lenora twice during her marriage. On both occasions, he borrowed money from Martin and insulted Lenora when she objected. After Martin's death, Edgar wrote one letter expressing sorrow and another asking whether any survey records had been recovered. Lenora ignored both. In March, he returned to Bellweather Crossing. Merton Bell told him Lenora had gone to work for August Romain. He also mentioned with satisfaction that she had carried Martin's notebook when she left. Edgar knew his brother's habits. He knew Martin often disguised sensitive survey information inside ordinary notes. More importantly, he remembered Martin mentioning a promising formation near Candlemaker Creek. Edgar visited the Western Meridian office and learned that the company had abandoned its whitecap survey after Martin's death. Then he hired 3 men from a failed claim-jumping outfit, Coulter Shaw, Wade Brigg, and a young drifter named Emmett Sloan. Edgar promised them a share of whatever they found. By the time Lenora and August returned from the prospect, Edgar was already traveling north. The first sign of trouble arrived as smoke. Nils saw it from the station porch, rising beyond the southern ridge. "That is no campfire," he said. Perry studied the dark column. "Could be a burned wagon. Could be somebody hiding the fact they burned one." August had planned to ride to Bellweather the next morning to file Martin's claim. Instead, he left before dawn to investigate the smoke. Lenora stood beside his horse. "Take Perry. He needs to stay here. Then wait until daylight." "It is daylight. The sun has not risen. It is considering it." She tightened the strap on his saddlebag harder than necessary. "You are making light because you know I am right. I am making light because you look prepared to tie me to the porch. Do not give me ideas." August's expression softened. "I will follow the lower route, check the smoke, and return by noon. Do not go farther." "I will not. Do not attempt Needle Gap." "I will not. And do not decide that being responsible means being foolish alone." He held her gaze. "I will return." Lenora had once heard those words from another man she loved. August seemed to understand the fear that crossed her face. He placed his gloved hand over hers where it rested on the saddle. "I am not Martin," he said gently. "No. And this is not Whitecap Spur. No. I will return." She nodded, though fear did not respond to reason as obediently as she wished. August rode south. Near noon, the weather changed. Clouds poured over the western peaks, turning the sky the color of iron. Wind swept through the pass. Within an hour, snow began falling so heavily that the stable disappeared from the station windows. August did not return. Perry paced the main room. He may have sheltered at the lower cabin. "He said he would return by noon," Lenora replied. "He may have decided not to risk the trail. That would be the sensible choice." Neither of them believed August always made the sensible choice when someone might need help. At dusk, the dogs began barking. Lenora hurried to the window. 4 riders emerged from the whiteout. Edgar entered first, smiling as though he had arrived for supper. He was handsome in the polished way of a man who worked harder on his appearance than his character. Snow clung to his expensive coat. A revolver rested openly at his hip. "Lenora," he said, "you look well." She remained behind the long table. "What are you doing here?" "Visiting family." "You have never traveled 200 miles to visit anyone without expecting money." Edgar removed his gloves. "I heard you had discovered something among Martin's papers." Perry moved closer to Lenora. Behind Edgar, Coulter Shaw closed the door. Wade Brigg carried a rifle. Emmett Sloan looked nervous and avoided everyone's eyes. Nils sat near the stove with a blanket over his knees, but one hand had disappeared beneath it. Lenora knew he kept a pistol in the chair pocket. She also knew he was too weak to win a gunfight against 3 armed men. "I discovered recipes," she said. Edgar smiled. "You always were a poor liar, and you always mistook confidence for intelligence." The smile vanished. Edgar stepped toward the table. "Martin found a mineral seam. He wrote to me before his final trip. Show me the letter. I misplaced it. You never received one. I know how he thought." "No. You know how you used him." Coulter Shaw struck the table with his rifle stock. "Enough family history. Where is the claim?" Lenora looked at Edgar. "You hired claim jumpers. I hired protection. From a widow and an old trapper?" Perry raised one finger. "There is also me." Wade aimed his rifle toward him. Perry lowered the finger. Edgar walked around the table until he stood close to Lenora. "Give me the notebook." "I do not have it." His eyes moved toward her room. Coulter and Wade searched the station. They overturned bedding, emptied drawers, and broke open Lenora's trunk. They found clothing, kitchen tools, letters, and a small tin containing Martin's wedding ring. They did not find the notebook. Lenora had hidden it inside a flour barrel beneath a false wooden bottom she had installed weeks earlier to protect the station accounts from mice and curious men. Edgar returned to the main room, carrying Martin's ring. "You kept this. It belonged to my husband. He was my brother. Then you should handle his memory with cleaner hands." Edgar dropped the ring on the table. "Where is August Romain?" "Out. Looking for us?" "Why? Did you leave something burning?" For the first time, Edgar's expression shifted. Lenora understood. The smoke had been bait. "What did you do?" she asked. Edgar shrugged. "We set fire to an abandoned freight shed. Your guide saw it and followed our trail." "Where is he?" "Alive when we left him." Perry lunged. Wade hit him across the shoulder with the rifle stock. Perry fell against the wall. Lenora moved toward him, but Coulter blocked her. "Stay where you are." Perry struggled to sit up. "I am fine," he said through clenched teeth. He was not fine, but he was conscious. Edgar removed his coat. "The storm will keep us here tonight. In the morning, you will show us the claim. I do not know where it is. Then we will begin encouraging your memory." Lenora looked at the windows. The storm had become a complete whiteout. No one could safely leave on horseback. Yet Blue Divide Station was not merely a room with doors. It was a building she had managed through an entire winter. She knew every weak floorboard, every storage shaft, every vent, crawl space, latch, and hidden access point. She knew the kitchen chimney connected to the old upper drying loft. She knew the original miners had built an emergency tunnel from the root cellar to the stable after a fire trapped workers inside decades earlier. Most of the tunnel had collapsed, but Lenora and Nils had cleared enough to move supplies. Edgar saw a trapped widow. Lenora saw a building full of possibilities. The intruders tied Perry and Nils to chairs. They locked Lenora in the pantry after demanding supper. "You expect me to cook for you?" she asked. Coulter grinned. "You expect us to go hungry?" Edgar leaned against the pantry door. "You have always been good at feeding men, Lenora. It may be the only useful thing about you." The insult no longer struck where it once had. Months earlier, Merton Bell had used her body to deny her hunger. Now Edgar used her skills to reduce her to service. Both men believed dignity was theirs to grant. They were wrong. Lenora prepared stew. She used venison, potatoes, onions, and enough salt to make the men thirsty. Into Edgar's bowl and Coulter's, she added a stronger portion of dried valerian root, which she kept for sleeplessness. It would not poison them. It would make them slow and drowsy. Emmett watched her from the doorway. "You are awfully calm," he said. "Panic wastes energy. You think someone is coming. In this storm." He glanced toward the main room. "I did not know they planned to hurt anyone. You came armed to steal a dead man's claim." Edgar said the claim belonged to his family. "I am Martin's family." Emmett looked ashamed. Lenora lowered her voice. "August may be injured outside. I do not know where, but Edgar does." Emmett's jaw tightened. "You help me, and Marshal Venn may care that you helped. You cannot promise that." "No, but I can promise Edgar will abandon you the moment it benefits him." From the main room, Coulter called, "Food ready?" Lenora filled the bowls. The men ate greedily. Perry and Nils were given smaller portions after Lenora insisted. Edgar drank 2 cups of coffee to fight the storm fatigue, unaware that Lenora had also placed valerian in his second cup. An hour later, Coulter's eyelids began to droop. Wade remained alert. He had eaten less. Edgar sat near the stove holding Martin's ring between his fingers. "He never understood opportunity," he said. Lenora stood beside the kitchen counter under Wade's watch. "Martin understood many things you do not. He worked for wages. He risked his life for companies that would replace him in a day. And you risk other people's lives for money you have not earned." Edgar's eyes narrowed. He would have shared the claim. "No, he named me. That was a mistake. Edgar sat straighter. You found the notice. Lenora said nothing. His smile returned. Thank you. Wade looked at him. So she does know. Edgar rose, slightly unsteady. Search the kitchen again. Coulter pushed himself from the chair. We searched it. Then search better. As the men moved toward the pantry, a heavy impact sounded from the stable. Everyone froze. The horses began screaming. Wade turned toward the door. What was that? Lenora knew. The old emergency tunnel exited beneath a feed bin. During the winter, snow had warped the covering. If someone entered from the station root cellar and pushed it open, the bin struck the stable wall. But no one had entered the root cellar, unless Perry had managed to free himself. Wade crossed toward the stable passage. At that moment, the lamps went out. Nils had kicked the fuel stand. Darkness swallowed the room. Perry threw himself sideways, crashing his chair into Wade's legs. The rifle fired into the ceiling. Plaster and dust rained down. Lenora seized the iron stove poker. Coulter grabbed at her in the dark, but the Valerian had slowed him. She struck his wrist. His revolver fell. She kicked it beneath the stove. "Emmett!" she shouted. "Choose now!" A lantern flared near the kitchen. Emmett stood holding it in one hand and his revolver in the other. He aimed at Edgar. "Tell Wade to put the rifle down." Edgar stared at him. "You fool." "Maybe." Wade rose from the floor, but Perry, still tied to the chair, hooked one leg around his ankle and dragged him down again. Nils produced the pistol from beneath his blanket. "Boy said put it down," he told Wade. Coulter rushed toward the door. Lenora swung the poker into the wooden latch lever, dropping the heavy crossbar. Coulter hit the door and staggered back. The entire struggle lasted less than a minute. Then the station went quiet, except for the horses and everyone's breathing. Edgar moved suddenly. He grabbed Lenora from behind and pressed a small knife beneath her jaw. "Drop the guns!" Emmett hesitated. Nils did not. "Knife will not stop a bullet," the old trapper said. "It will stop her." Lenora felt Edgar's breath against her ear. "You should have given me the notebook. You should have learned more about kitchens." She drove her heel backward onto his foot and threw her weight down. Edgar lost balance. Lenora twisted, caught his knife wrist with both hands, and slammed it against the edge of the work table. The knife fell. Edgar struck her across the face. Pain flashed through her cheek, but she did not release him. She shoved him backward with all the strength she had developed carrying water, lifting flour sacks, moving timber, and surviving a winter that had demanded more from her than he could understand. Edgar crashed into the pantry shelves. Jars fell and shattered around him. Emmett stepped forward and aimed the revolver at his chest. "It is over." Edgar looked at Coulter and Wade. Neither moved. Coulter was half-conscious. Wade lay face down with Nils's pistol trained on him. Perry laughed breathlessly from the floor. "For a peaceful station, we do have evenings." Lenora untied him first. His shoulder was swelling, but nothing appeared broken. Together, they bound Edgar and the claim jumpers with rope. Then Lenora turned to Emmett. "Where is August?" Emmett looked toward Edgar. "Tell her," Edgar said bitterly. "You have already betrayed everyone else." Emmett ignored him. "There is a hunter's shelter near Split Pine Ridge. They tied him inside. Coulter hit him with a rifle. I do not know how badly." The storm still raged. Perry looked out the window. "No one can reach Split Pine tonight." Lenora was already putting on her coat. August had taught her the route. "I can." Perry blocked the door. "You cannot see 10 feet. I know the markers. Some may be buried. Then I will use the creek line. That slope is unstable. So is leaving an injured man in an unheated shelter." Nils spoke from his chair. "Take the dogs." Perry turned. "You cannot be agreeing with this." "I am not. But she is going." Lenora gathered rope, blankets, medical supplies, hot bricks wrapped in wool, and the emergency food packets she had designed. Emmett offered to guide her to the exact shelter. Perry refused to let them go alone. "I have one working arm," he said. "That is enough to point." They left Nils with a rifle and 3 bound prisoners. Before Lenora stepped outside, Edgar called after her. "You will never hold that claim. Men with more money will bury you in court." Lenora looked back. "Then I will meet them there." The whiteout erased the world beyond the porch. Barnaby and the strongest sled dog pulled a narrow rescue sledge. Lenora led with a rope tied around her waist. Perry followed on snowshoes, one arm secured against his body. Emmett carried the lantern, though its light reached only a few feet. They navigated by touch as much as sight. Lenora found the creek bank beneath the snow by probing with a pole. She counted bends, just as August had taught her. At the third bend, they turned uphill toward Split Pine Ridge. Wind drove ice against their faces. Twice, Perry urged her to stop. Twice, she continued. At the base of the ridge, Barnaby began pulling hard toward the trees. The dog had caught a scent. They found the shelter nearly buried. The door had been tied from the outside with wire. Emmett cut it. August lay inside, unconscious. Blood had dried along his temple. His coat was gone, and his hands were bound. Snow had blown through gaps in the wall and covered one side of his body. Lenora dropped beside him. August! He did not respond. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck. A pulse. Slow, but present. Get the blankets ready. They cut his bonds, removed his wet outer clothing, and wrapped him carefully. Lenora placed the warm bricks near his torso, but not directly against his skin. Perry crouched nearby. Can we move him? We must. They secured August to the sledge. On the return journey, the storm worsened. Snow filled their tracks almost immediately. Lenora used the creek again, but at the second bend, the bank collapsed beneath Emmett. He fell waist-deep into hidden water. Perry and Lenora pulled him out with the rope. Within seconds, ice formed on his trousers. I cannot feel my legs, Emmett gasped. You keep moving, Lenora ordered. I will slow you down, then be slow and alive. She wrapped an emergency blanket around him and placed his hands on the rear of the sledge. Push! They reached Blue Divide Station shortly before dawn. Nils opened the door before they knocked. You took your time, he said, though relief broke his voice. Lenora and Perry carried August to the warm room. Emmett collapsed near the stove. Nils cut away his frozen trousers and treated his legs, while Lenora examined August. The head wound looked severe, but not fatal. His left ankle was badly swollen. His breathing was shallow from cold. For hours, Lenora warmed him gradually, just as she had warmed Perry and Nils after the stable collapse. She spoke his name, pressed warm broth to his lips, and watched for changes in his breathing. Morning passed. Then afternoon. The storm weakened near sunset. August opened his eyes. His gaze moved across the ceiling before settling on Lenora. You went out, he whispered. Yes. I told you the terrain was dangerous. She laughed and cried at the same time. You may fire me when you can stand. He tried to smile. Not likely. Marshal Asa Venn reached Blue Divide Station the following afternoon with 6 deputies and a doctor. A freight patrol had discovered the burned shed and followed tracks until the storm forced them to shelter. When the sky cleared, they continued north. Marshal Venn was a square-built man in his 50s, with a mustache the color of iron, and no patience for elaborate lies. He listened to Lenora's account, examined the bound prisoners, and questioned each person separately. Edgar claimed the candle-glass load belonged to the Vale family. Mrs. Vale is a member of that family, Venn observed. Edgar claimed August had attacked him. While tied inside a shelter, Venn asked. Edgar claimed Lenora had drugged them. I gave them a legal sleeping herb in food they forced me to prepare, Lenora said. The marshal considered that. Seems they were fortunate you did not use more salt. Edgar and the 2 claim jumpers were arrested on charges that included unlawful confinement, assault, attempted claim theft, and destruction of property. Emmett was also taken into custody, but Marshal Venn noted his cooperation and his role in preventing further violence. Before leaving, Venn examined Martin's claim notice. This needs to be filed immediately, he said. The deadline passed months ago, Lenora replied. A discovery claim can be protected if you show that the claimant died before filing and that the notice was recovered later. There will be a hearing. Edgar said investors could bury me in court. Investors say many things before meeting paperwork. The marshal looked at Lenora over the top of the document. Do you have paperwork? She glanced toward the station shelves, where months of ledgers stood in perfect order. Yes. Then you already frighten half the mining companies in Colorado. August's recovery took several weeks. His ankle had been fractured, and the doctor ordered him to remain off it. August accepted this instruction with the obedience of a wolf being asked to knit. On the second day, Lenora found him attempting to reach the stable with a crutch. "What are you doing?" "Checking the horses." Perry checked them. "Perry forgets the grey mare's left hoof." I reminded him. "The north stall latch sticks." Nils repaired it. August looked toward the yard as though seeking another emergency. Lenora folded her arms. "You may return to bed voluntarily, or I can ask Perry to carry you." August glanced at Perry, who stood behind her grinning. "I would enjoy that," Perry said. August returned to bed. During his recovery, Lenora sat with him in the evenings. Their conversations became less guarded. August told her he had been married once, briefly, when he was 26. His wife Celia had loved music and city streets. She had tried mountain life for a year and left after realizing affection could not make isolation feel like home. "Do you hate her?" Lenora asked. "No. She told the truth before we destroyed each other." "Where is she now?" "St. Louis, married to a piano seller." "That seems suitable." She wrote once to say, "They live above the shop. She hears scales all day. Perhaps she has reconsidered the mountains." August laughed. Lenora told him about Martin's habit of organizing buttons by size, his dislike of peaches, and the way he hummed when concentrating. Speaking of Martin no longer felt like disloyalty to the present. August never competed with a dead man. He listened because Martin had been part of the life that shaped her. One night, August looked at her across the table. "When the claim is settled, you will have choices. I have choices now. More choices. That worries you?" "Yes." She waited. He rubbed one hand over his beard. "I do not know whether you stayed because Blue Divide became home or because winter prevented you from leaving. Do you want me to leave?" "No." The answer came quickly. Lenora's heart beat harder. August continued more carefully. "I want you to stay because you choose the life here, not because Bellweather was cruel, not because you owe me for giving you work, not because you believe there is nowhere else." Lenora looked around the station. The room was orderly now. Copper pots hung above the kitchen. Shelves held labeled jars. Emergency packs waited near the door. A fresh ledger lay open beside the lamp. Through the wall came Perry's laughter and Zill's telling him to be quiet. "I came here because I had nowhere else," she said. "I stayed because I became useful." "You were useful before." "I know that now." August's expression softened. "And what do you want?" he asked. She had spent much of her life answering that question with practical needs. Food, rent, work, safety. Desire had seemed indulgent. Now she allowed herself to consider it. "I want ownership of my labor," she said. "I want no one deciding whether I deserve to eat. I want a kitchen that feeds people without humiliating them. I want the claim protected because Martin intended it for me. I want Blue Divide to survive." August nodded. "And personally?" She met his eyes. "I want you to ask a less cautious question." He was silent for a moment, then he stood carefully on his good leg, crossed the small distance between them, and held out his hand. "Lenora, when my ankle heals, would you walk outside with me without an inventory sheet, medical emergency, or armed criminal requiring attention?" "That depends." "On what?" "Whether you intend to call it courting." "I do." "Then yes." He lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles. It was not a dramatic gesture. No music played. No storm broke against the windows. Yet Lenora felt a quiet certainty settle inside her. The claim hearing took place in Bellweather Crossing in June. By then, samples from the candle glass lode had been tested by 2 independent assayers. The seam contained high-grade silver, with smaller deposits of lead and zinc. It would not create an empire, but developed responsibly, it could produce steady income for many years. Western Meridian challenged Lenora's ownership. Edgar challenged it from jail through an attorney. 2 investors presented older maps they claimed proved prior discovery. Lenora arrived with Martin's notebook, the original claim notice, dated supply receipts, August's route records, and testimony from the assayers. She also brought copies of every relevant page, because she had learned never to carry one version of the truth when powerful men preferred another. The hearing lasted 3 days. Merton Bell attended each session, pretending business had brought him to the courthouse. On the final afternoon, the judge recognized Martin and Lenora Vale's claim, transferred Martin's interest to Lenora as his widow, and rejected Edgar's petition. Lenora walked out of the courthouse, owning the candle-glass load. Merton waited near the steps. "Mrs. Vale," he called. "A word." She stopped. He adjusted his gold watch chain. "I understand you will need suppliers. My store has the best freight connections in the valley. You once cheated me over oats." His face tightened. "There was a misunderstanding. You weighed the sack after I asked you not to cheat me." "That seems well understood. Business is business." "Yes," she turned to August, who stood beside her with a cane. "Mr. Romain, remind me which store extended fair credit to the station after the winter." "Dahl's Mercantile in North Fork. We will continue with them." Merton lowered his voice. "You should not let a personal grievance interfere with profitable arrangements." Lenora looked through the store window at the sacks of flour stacked behind his counter. "Hunger taught me that business is always personal to the person who needs bread." She walked away. The development of Candle-Glass Load began slowly. Lenora refused to sell the claim outright, despite generous offers. Instead, she leased extraction rights to a regional company under strict terms. The contract limited dangerous winter work, required proper shelters, and established a fund for injured laborers and their families. Several investors called her demands sentimental. She called them expensive lessons already paid for by others. Blue Divide Station changed as well. Lenora used part of the mining income to repair the main structure, reinforce the stable, and add a proper infirmary. She purchased medical supplies, blankets, preserved food, and strong boots in a range of sizes. She hired a schoolteacher from North Fork to help travelers write letters and read contracts during the summer months. A large sign was placed above the station door. Food, shelter, and basic care available. Payment accepted when possible. Dignity required from everyone. Perry objected to the final sentence. "What if a person arrives without dignity?" he asked. "Then we lend them some until they recover," Nils approved. The station became known throughout the range. Freight crews stopped there before attempting the northern pass. Injured prospectors recovered in the infirmary. Families caught between settlements found a warm floor and hot food. Lenora kept records of every meal and blanket, not to shame those who could not pay, but to understand what the station needed. Some travelers paid in cash, others chopped wood, repaired harnesses, cleaned stalls, or returned months later with supplies. A few disappeared without repaying anything. Lenora fed them too. She knew the difference between generosity and carelessness. She also knew that a hungry person should not have to perform worthiness before receiving soup. In late summer, Edgar Vale was convicted. Coulter and Wade received longer sentences because of prior warrants. Emmett, whose cooperation had helped prevent bloodshed and supported the prosecution, served a shorter term and was later released under supervision. 2 years afterward, he returned to Blue Divide Station. He stood outside the door, holding his hat in both hands. Lenora recognized him immediately. "I am looking for work," he said. Perry, now the station's official assistant manager, stepped beside her. "There are easier places." "I do not deserve easy." Lenora studied him. "You are not hired because you feel guilty." He looked down. "Then why would you hire me?" "I have not said I will." "Can you repair a roof?" "Yes." "Can you follow instructions?" "I am learning." "Can you treat a hungry stranger without asking whether he earned the meal?" Emmett raised his eyes. "Yes." Lenora nodded toward the tool shed. "Perry will test the first 2 answers. Time will test the third." Emmett worked at Blue Divide for 6 years and eventually became responsible for maintaining the emergency shelters throughout the southern routes. August and Lenora married the autumn after the claim hearing. The ceremony was held outside the station, beneath cottonwood trees turned gold by the season. Marshal Venn served as witness. Nils wore a suit that had not fit him properly since 1868. Perry delivered a speech so long that the cook threatened to serve dessert without him. Lenora wore deep blue wool. tailored to fit her body rather than disguise it. Before the ceremony, she stood alone in her room with Martin's notebook. She opened to the page containing the candle-glass directions. For a moment, grief returned with all its old weight, not as an enemy, but as proof of love that had existed and mattered. "You tried to protect me," she whispered. Then she closed the book and joined the life waiting outside. August did not promise to rescue her. He knew better. He promised partnership. "I will listen when you see danger I do not," he told her, before their friends. Lenora smiled. "That may occur frequently." The guests laughed. She made her own promise. "I will stand beside you when the trail is clear and when it disappears." Their marriage grew through work rather than fantasy. They disagreed over expenses, rescue risks, hiring decisions, and whether August's boots belonged near the kitchen stove. They apologized when wrong and reconsidered when uncertain. They were not completed by one another. They were strengthened by being fully seen. Years passed. The Whitecap Range remained beautiful and dangerous. Storms still arrived early. Wagons still broke. Companies still valued profit over caution, and desperate men still chased rumors of wealth. But Blue Divide Station became a fixed point in that uncertainty. Travelers recognized its lamps from the ridge. They knew someone inside would open the door. Lenora's battered notebook eventually became 3 books. The first held Martin's original recipes and codes. The second contained meals designed for mountain travel. The third was devoted to care, broths for fever, foods for recovery, ration plans for stranded groups, and instructions for warming people rescued from cold. She titled the third book, No One Turned Away. A publisher in Denver later printed portions of it for frontier stations and rescue camps. Lenora insisted the most important instruction appear on the first page. Never judge a person's hunger by looking at the person. Nils lived long enough to see the new infirmary completed. He died peacefully one spring morning, in a chair near the stove, after eating 2 helpings of bacon despite Lenora's objections. Perry claimed Nils's last words were, "Do not let August cook." August maintained that Nils had said nothing of the kind. Lenora believed Perry. A small marker was placed above the creek where Nils had taught them to cut safe pine for tea. Perry eventually married the North Fork schoolteacher and built a house within shouting distance of the station. He remained outspoken, loyal, and incapable of keeping a personal story under 20 minutes. Marshal Venn retired and began visiting Blue Divide every autumn, insisting he came for the mountain air rather than Lenora's apple cake. Merton Bell's store closed after a larger mercantile opened near the new rail stop. For a time, he blamed changing routes, unfair competitors, and disloyal customers. Years later, older and less proud, he arrived at Blue Divide during a freezing rainstorm. His coat was soaked. His horse had gone lame. He carried little money. Perry recognized him and came to find Lenora. "You want me to tell him we are full?" he asked. "Are we?" "No." "Then give him a dry blanket." Perry studied her. After what he did, Lenora looked through the doorway. Merton stood shivering beside the stove, diminished by age and circumstance. "What he did taught me what this place must never become." She served him soup herself. Merton could barely meet her eyes. "I suppose you remember me," he said. "I do." He stared into the bowl. "I was unkind." "Yes. I thought you might send me away." "I considered it." He looked up. "Why did you not?" "Because hunger does not ask for public approval." Recognition passed across his face. Shame followed. Lenora did not require him to apologize again. She did not pretend his cruelty had never happened. Mercy did not erase memory. It prevented memory from becoming a prison. When Merton left the next morning, he paid what he could and promised the rest. Lenora never saw him again. She did not know whether he became kinder. She knew only that Blue Divide had remained true to its purpose. On the 20th anniversary of Lenora's arrival, a storm closed the northern pass and stranded 31 people at the station. The dining room overflowed. Children slept beneath tables. Freight drivers shared benches with prospectors. A young widow sat near the stove, holding an empty purse and apologizing for the amount of food her sons ate. Lenora, now silver-haired but still broad and strong, placed another loaf of bread on the table. "You do not apologize for feeding children," she said. "I cannot pay." "Then pay when life allows." "What if it never does?" Lenora glanced around the room. August stood near the door, organizing bedding. Perry argued with a mule driver over wet boots. Emmett carried wood to the stove. Lamps glowed against the windows, while the storm covered every trail outside. "Then someone else will," Lenora said. "That is how a refuge works." Later that night, after the travelers slept, Lenora and August stood on the porch beneath the shelter of the roof. Snow moved across the yard in soft waves. "The station is full," August said. "It was built for that. It was built for 6 miners. It lacked ambition." He smiled and slipped his hand into hers. From the porch, they could see the faint outline of the ridge leading toward the candle-glass lode. The mine had funded their work, but it was not the most valuable thing Martin had left behind. He had left evidence that Lenora's future mattered. August had offered her opportunity without demanding dependence. The people of Blue Divide had given her respect because she earned it, then friendship because she allowed it. And Lenora had built from those gifts something larger than security. She had created a place that answered cruelty with structure, hunger with food, danger with preparation, and loneliness with an open door. She had once believed dignity was something others could withhold. Years in the mountains taught her otherwise. Dignity lived in the decision to rise after humiliation, to use hardship without worshipping it, and to refuse to become cruel simply because cruelty had once been powerful. The truest measure of strength was not how much a person could endure alone, it was how much safety that person could create for others after surviving the storm.